The real story. Horror. Only. Ads. Mr. Scare.
I remember it happened when I was fresh out of college, eager to start my career. Finding a place to live in the city was a challenge until I got a call from Uncle John, an old friend of my family. He mentioned a small, ridiculously cheap house in the suburbs.
There's only one condition,
He said gravely.
Don't go up to the attic.
Why? I asked, half joking. His voice dropped, unusually serious.
Don't ask questions, just don't go up there.
I hesitated. The warning lingered in my mind, but the low rent was too tempting to pass up, so I agreed. The house was smaller than I expected. Just a living room, a tiny bedroom, and a kitchen. At the far corner of the living room stood an old wooden staircase leading up to the attic. Something about the stairs was unsettling. They seemed to beckon, almost alive. I shook off the feeling, determined to follow Uncle John's advice. The first night was uneventful, though the house felt oddly cold, even in the summer. On the second night, I started hearing things. A creak at first, then something sounded like footsteps, and something heavy dragging across the attic floor. It's just the old wood, or maybe rats, I told myself. But the unease gnawed at me. One evening, my old college roommate Dave came over to stay for the night. About Dave, he is the kind of person who could always turn any tense situation into a joke.
You live here? Looks like it's straight out of a horror movie.
He teased. We were watching a movie when the attic door suddenly creaked open. Both of us froze. Wind? I suggested, my voice weak. Dave laughed nervously.
You believe that?
He grabbed a flashlight and nudged me.
Come on, let's check it out.
No way, I said firmly, remembering Uncle John's warning. Dave grinned.
You're no fun.
He shut the door, but the mood had shifted. That night, I dreamed of standing in the attic, surrounded by shadows. A tall figure loomed, wearing a cold white mask. The days passed, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. Furniture moved on its own, whispers echoed through the house, and an overwhelming sense of being watched followed me everywhere. Dave, undeterred by my reluctance, kept egging me on.
Let's just take a quick peek. What's the worst that could happen?
One night, I awoke to his voice calling from downstairs. Dave, I called back, stumbling to the living room. But Dave wasn't there. Instead, I heard a whisper from the attic.
Come up. Come up.
The voice was eerily familiar, yet wrong, like someone trying to mimic Dave. Overwhelmed by fear, I grabbed my phone and called Dave, my closest friend, and the only person I trusted with something this bizarre. My voice trembled as I recounted everything, the sounds, the whispers, and the warnings. You need to come over now, I pleaded. Within 5 minutes, Dave was at my door, his usual confident demeanor replaced with a flicker of unease.
All right,
He said, exhaling sharply.
let's see what's up there.
Arming myself with a sturdy wooden stick I found in the corner, I led the way. The creaky staircase seemed even more menacing in the dim light, every step groaning under our cautious weight. My heart pounded harder in my chest as I climbed, gripping the stick tightly like it was my last defense. Behind me, Dave followed, his usual humor replaced with silence. Though I could sense his nerves, he didn't hesitate. Whatever we were about to face, at least we were doing it together. The attic was dim, lit only by the moonlight filtering through a dusty window. A single chair sat in the center, and beside it was a large wooden chest.
What's in there?
Dave asked, his voice hushed. I hesitated before opening the chest. Inside was a white mask, identical to the one in my dream. The air grew heavy, and the attic door slammed shut behind us. A deep, guttural voice echoed.
You shouldn't have come here.
We spun around to see a towering figure emerging from the shadows. Its face was a void, the mask resting in its hands. Dave screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The figure advanced, each step sending a chill through the room.
You broke the rule.
It hissed, its voice resonating in my skull. The figure reached out and touched my shoulder. A searing pain coursed through me, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was alone in the living room. Dust coated every surface. The windows were boarded up, and time seemed to have stopped. I called for Dave, but there was no response, only the faint sound of footsteps pacing above me. Days turned to weeks, but I refused to accept my fate. One evening, as I sat staring at the boarded-up windows, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this house win. There had to be a way out. I remembered Uncle John's warning. He had said,
Don't go up to the attic.
I had ignored it, but maybe the attic wasn't the source of the curse. Maybe it was the rule itself, the idea that I should never break the boundary, that fear alone was enough to trap me. With new resolve, I decided to confront it. I climbed the stairs once more, determined to face whatever awaited. This time, I wasn't afraid. The attic door opened easily, as though it were waiting for me. To my surprise, the attic was empty. No shadows, no figure, no mask. Just the same dusty furniture and the moonlight streaming through the window. The eerie tension in the air was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring into the emptiness. Before it hit me, the curse wasn't in the house, it was in the fear I allowed to control me. As long as I respected that boundary, it held me prisoner. By breaking it, I had reclaimed my freedom. The door creaked behind me and I turned to see the house as it was before. No longer menacing, no longer haunted. I could hear the sound of footsteps from the living room, but this time, it was Dave, his voice calling to me. I ran downstairs and found him sitting on the couch, looking bewildered.
Where have you been?
He asked. I was stuck, I said, my voice trembling with relief. But I figured it out. Fear holds you captive. It's not the place. It's the fear you let control you. Dave and I left the house carrying with us the lesson and the haunting memory that I will never forget. This is the first time I've shared this story with anyone other than Dave, and that person is you. And with that, I stepped out of the house, finally free. I had just found a cheap apartment in the city. It wasn't big, but it was perfect for someone living alone. When I saw the listing, I thought I'd gotten lucky. It was much cheaper than anything else in the area. But from the moment I moved in, something felt off. The apartment was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind of silence that makes even the smallest sounds feel amplified. The landlord, an older man with a weary look, handed me the keys and said,
If anything strange happens at night, don't pay it any mind. Just let it go.
I just smiled. I'd lived in plenty of old buildings before, and I always believed that strange noises were just creaking walls or leaky pipes. His words didn't scare me, they only made me curious. That first night I couldn't sleep well, not because of the new environment, but because of the strange sound. Around midnight I heard it, a faint dripping noise, steady and rhythmic, echoing in the stillness. I assumed it was the bathroom faucet, but the sound wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was coming from above me, right above my bed. I tried to ignore it, but the dripping grew louder. Each drop hit the floor with a heavy, unnatural sound. When I turned on my flashlight and looked up, I saw it. A large, dark stain spreading across the ceiling. Thick liquid was dripping from it, leaving long, black streaks on the wooden floor. But it didn't look like water. It was dark, almost black, and it had a metallic smell. The next morning, I called the landlord about the stain. He paused before replying,
It's probably just old pipes. I'll send someone to take a look.
but no one came. That night, the dripping started again, louder this time, more deliberate. Unable to sleep, I moved to the couch in the living room. As I adjusted the blanket, I found something crumpled under the coffee table. It was an old, yellowed piece of paper with messy handwriting that read,
They are watching you.
I felt a chill run down my spine, but I convinced myself it was just a prank left by the last tenant. By the third night, the stain had spread across most of the ceiling. The dripping sound continued, steady like a ticking clock. I shone my flashlight directly at the stain. At first, it just looked like a dark, wet patch. But as I stared, I started to see a shape. The stain wasn't random. It was forming a face. The hollow eyes of the face seemed to stare down at me. Its mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. I stepped back, a cold shiver running down my spine. After a few minutes, I turned off the light, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were following me. I barely slept that night, and the sound of the dripping haunted me. the entire next day. On the fourth night, things got worse. It wasn't just the dripping anymore. This time I started hearing whispers. They didn't sound like they were coming from the neighbors. They were inside my room. At first, the whispers were faint, like a breeze. But as I strained to listen, the words became clearer.
Get out.
I stared at the ceiling where the face was still visible in the stain. But this time, its hollow eyes seemed to move, following me. I tried to stay calm, but the whispers grew louder, echoing throughout the room. Unable to take it any longer, I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my phone in hand. But even in there, I could still hear the whispers. I swear, I heard something else too. A laugh. But it wasn't human. At around 3 a.m., I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a few things and went to the front door. But when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The door wasn't locked. It felt like someone was holding it shut from the other side. I turned around, shining my flashlight across the room. That's when I saw the stain on the ceiling. It had spread across the entire ceiling, and the face wasn't still anymore. It was moving. Its mouth opened wide, emitting a sound like a low, guttural screech. The hollow eyes followed my every move. I pounded on the door in panic. Then, as if someone had let go, the door suddenly gave way, and I stumbled out, gasping for air. I never went back to that apartment. The landlord called me the next day, asking why I'd left. When I told him what happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said,
You're not the first one to leave like that.
I never thought I'd return to Vietnam. The last time I was here, I was a 20-year-old soldier, caught up in a war I barely understood. 30 years later, I came back, not as a soldier, but as a tourist. I hoped this trip would close a chapter of my life I'd carried for far too long. Hanoi had changed so much. Narrow streets were packed with motorbikes, and modern buildings stood alongside traditional homes. Everything felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. I rented a small guest house tucked away in a quiet alley. The house was old, with faded yellow walls and a red-tiled roof. The landlord, Mr. Lamb, was an elderly man with a tired demeanor.
This house is old.
He said, his voice slow and deliberate.
If anything strange happens at night, don't pay it any mind. Just ignore it.
I didn't think much of it. I'd lived in older houses before, and strange noises never bothered me. The first night, I couldn't sleep well. Not because of jet lag, but because of strange sounds. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps on the wooden floor. At first, I thought it was Mr. Lamb downstairs, but then the footsteps stopped, right outside my door. I turned on the light and opened the door, shining my flashlight into the hallway. There was no one there. When I returned to bed, I noticed the hallway light flickering. That uneasy feeling lingered for the rest of the night, keeping me wide awake. The next morning, I decided to tidy up the room. In the corner, I discovered an old wooden trunk covered in dust. Inside, I found a collection of faded photographs, handwritten letters, and a pocket watch that had stopped long ago. One photograph caught my attention. It showed a group of young American soldiers. On the back, someone had written,
To my dearest family, if I don't make it back, know that I love you.
That uneasy feeling returned, but I tried to brush it off. That night, I dreamed of a young American soldier standing by the window of my room. He was wearing his uniform, his back turned to me, staring silently into the alley. I tried to call out to him, but no sound came from my mouth. When he slowly turned around, his face, it wasn't there. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The next morning, I told Mr. Lamb about my dream. He hesitated before speaking.
This house used to shelter American soldiers after the war.
He said.
One of them disappeared. They never found him, and some say his spirit never left.
The items in the trunk belonged to that soldier. Every night after that, I dreamed of the soldier. In the latest dream, he was pointing to a specific spot outside near a cluster of trees in the alley. I felt like he wanted me to find something. Following the dream's clue, I dug at the spot he pointed to and found a small metal box. Inside was the soldier's dog tag. I contacted the U.S. Embassy and arranged for the tag to be sent back to his family. After that, the strange occurrences stopped. I left Vietnam feeling lighter, as if I'd done something that mattered. Sometimes spirits don't haunt out of malice. They're just waiting for someone to hear their story and help them find peace. I was a young man living in a quiet, old neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. One day, I received a peculiar invitation from my friend, Mark. He had called to invite me to a party at 8 p.m. on Saturday, held at a house at the very end of Oakwood Street. The mention of that house sent a chill down my spine. It had been abandoned for years, its windows dark and shattered, its walls overrun with vines. Locals often whispered about the eerie noises that seeped out of it at night. Laughter, sobbing, and the phantom echo of footsteps.
I rented it for the night.
Mark said casually over the phone. His voice was bright, unfazed.
It's perfect for a party. Come on, don't believe those silly rumors. It'll be fun.
I hesitated, the story swirling in my mind, but Mark's enthusiasm was infectious. Reluctantly, I agreed. That evening, I walked down the narrow street to the house at the end. The night was pitch black, with only the flickering yellow streetlights casting shadows on the moss-covered walls. When the house came into view, I was struck by its eerie appearance, a two-story building with peeling paint, closed windows, and an atmosphere so cold it felt unnatural. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. Suddenly, the door creaked open slowly as if someone was inside. "Mark, is anyone here?" I called, but only an echo answered. I stepped inside and found the house decorated for the party, twinkling lights, a banquet table, and soft background music. Around 5 or 6 people were standing and talking, but what struck me as odd was that they were all dressed in old-fashioned clothing, like something out of the past. Mark appeared from the shadows and slapped me on the back.
You made it. Come on in. Let's have some fun.
Though something felt off, I smiled awkwardly and joined the gathering. I sat at the table and started talking to a young woman named Lily. She had deep black eyes, pale skin, and a gentle smile.
Are you Mark's friend?
She asked in a whisper. I nodded, but as the conversation continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about Lily was different. Every time I looked into her eyes, it was as if I was being drawn into an endless void. Looking around, I realized that all the other guests seemed odd too. They talked, but didn't move at all, like statues that somehow knew how to speak. "Where's Mark?" I stood up to find my friend, but suddenly the music stopped and the lights flickered out. A chilling laugh echoed from upstairs.
Welcome, my guests, to our party.
I turned and saw Mark standing at the top of the stairs, but his face was twisted, his skin gray and his eyes burning red. "Mark, what are you doing?" I screamed, but no answer came. He just smiled, then disappeared into the darkness. Lily grabbed my hand and whispered,
You need to leave now. This isn't a normal party. They're not human.
Before I could react, the door slammed shut and the entire house trembled. I was pushed into a small room where the dim light of a candle revealed walls covered in blood. Lily followed me in and pointed to a painting on the wall, an image of a family standing in front of the house, but their faces had been ripped apart, revealing empty hollows inside.
They passed away long ago, but their souls are trapped here. Every guest who comes becomes their next victim.
I stepped back in horror. "And you? Are you one of them?" Lily fell silent, her eyes starting to bleed.
I used to be, but I'm not anymore.
Panicking, I ran out of the room, but every door led me back to the same bloody room. Mark appeared again, laughing.
Do you think you can escape? We're all part of this house now. Stay with us. Forever.
I screamed, slamming my hands against the wall. To my surprise, I found a small crack that led outside. I crawled through, feeling the cool air on my skin. But as soon as I stepped out, I realized something horrifying. I was standing in front of the house again, exactly the same as before. I knocked on the door, and once again, it slowly creaked open. Resigned, I stepped inside, expecting to find myself back at the party. The strange guests were indeed there, standing in their unnatural stillness. Lily turned to me, her empty eyes filled with sorrow.
You're here? Come on in, let's have some fun.
she whispered, just as before. But this time, something was different. In the corner of the room, I noticed a faint golden light flickering. It was subtle, almost invisible amidst the dim, eerie glow of the house. I followed the light, weaving through the frozen guests. Mark appeared, his face twisted in mockery.
You really think you'll find a way out this time?
He sneered. I ignored him and moved closer to the light. It was coming from a small, locked box on the mantelpiece. As if guided by instinct, I reached for it. Mark lunged at me, his form shifting into a monstrous shadow, but Lily stepped in his path.
Run!
She screamed, her voice breaking. I grabbed the box and sprinted upstairs, my heart pounding as Mark's voice roared behind me.
You think you can escape my house? It's part of you now.
I burst into a dusty attic, where the golden light grew stronger. The box glowed in my hands, and I realized it was covered in intricate carvings, a story etched into its surface. It told of a family cursed to guard this house, trapped by their own greed and betrayal.
Open it.
A voice whispered. I turned to see Lily, now shimmering faintly, as if the light had reached her too. Her hollow eyes were filled with hope.
The box holds the truth, but it will demand a price.
What kind of price? I asked, my voice trembling.
Freedom always comes at a cost,
She replied. Mark's shadow burst into the attic, filling the room with a chilling wind.
Don't you dare!
He howled, his form twisting and writhing. Without thinking, I opened the box. A blinding light engulfed the room, and I was no longer in the attic. Instead, I stood in a sunlit meadow. Around me, the family from the painting stood, their faces whole and human again.
You broke the curse,
one of them said.
We were trapped by our own sins, but your courage has set us free.
Lily stood beside them, her appearance transformed. She smiled, no longer hollow or sorrowful.
Thank you,
she said, but I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. When I looked down, I saw the golden light from the box now glowing faintly within me. What's happening? I asked.
You're free to leave,
Lily said.
But a piece of this house will always stay with you. It's the price you paid to end the loop. Use it wisely.
I opened my eyes, a haze clouding my thoughts. The familiar room came into focus. I glanced at the clock. 7 p.m. Saturday. Just an hour left until Mark's birthday party. I sighed in relief, convincing myself it was just a dream, nothing more. But as I sat up, an uneasiness clung to me. Fragmented images from that dream surged back, chilling laughter, fleeting shadows, and the feeling of being dragged into an abyss. I shook my head, trying to push it all aside. At precisely 8 p.m., I arrived at Mark's house. The place was vibrant with lights, friends gathered in groups, and laughter echoing in the air. Mark greeted me with his usual warm smile.
You're finally here. We've been waiting for you.
Yet, as I stepped inside, I froze. Something felt off. The room, the faces, it all seemed too perfect, like a staged scene. My gaze locked onto the clock on the wall. Its minute hand jittered, stuck in a loop between two numbers. 8:10. Suddenly, I spotted myself standing in a shadowy corner of the room. There was no mistaking it. Same clothes, same face, but the expression was different. Terrified. His mouth moved as though screaming, but no sound escaped. I spun around, ready to call for help, but the lively atmosphere had vanished. A deafening silence enveloped the room, and an icy chill crept into my bones. And then, once again, the darkness surged forward, swallowing me whole. When I opened my eyes, I was back in bed. The clock read 7 p.m. Saturday. What the hell is happening? This time, I decided not to go to Mark's house. But it didn't matter what I did, whether I went, stayed, or tried to escape. The loop persisted. Every time I attended the party, everything appeared normal. Yet the moment I touched the clock on the wall, reality shattered, and I was dragged back to the beginning. Eventually, after countless repetitions, I resolved to break the silence. During one loop, I stood in the center of the room and shouted, "Mark, don't you see anything strange?" The room fell dead silent. Mark stared at me, his eyes turning cold, unrecognizable.
You weren't supposed to notice,
he whispered. Before I could react, a blinding light consumed everything. I woke up again, drenched in sweat. The clock read 7 p.m. Saturday, but this time, the room wasn't familiar. The message on the wall burned itself into my mind. One last chance. Make it count. My heart pounded as I sat frozen on the edge of my bed. The weight of the words felt like a noose tightening around my neck. There was no escape this time, only confrontation. I dressed quickly, every movement deliberate. If this truly was the last chance, I needed answers. No more running, no more guessing. I left the house and headed straight for Oakwood Street. As I approached Mark's house, the familiar hum of laughter and music floated through the air. The facade looked the same, cheerful and welcoming, but I knew better now. I stepped inside, greeted by the same vibrant lights and lively crowd. Mark approached, his grin wide, but there was something different this time. His eyes lingered on me, as though he knew I had finally begun to understand.
You're just in time,
he said. His voice was warm, but his words carried a strange finality. I didn't respond. My focus was on the clock on the wall. The hands were moving, normal at first, but as the minute hand inched closer to 8:10, it began to stutter. The familiar sensation of dread crept over me. This was it, the moment everything unraveled. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "what is this place? What's happening to me?" His smile faltered, just for a second.
You weren't supposed to ask that,
he murmured. The lights flickered, and the room seemed to ripple like a mirage. I turned to the crowd, but they were no longer moving. Frozen in place, their faces blurred and featureless, like half-finished sculptures. The air grew heavy, and a low hum resonated through the house. "Tell me the truth," I demanded, stepping closer to Mark. "Why am I stuck in this loop? What is this party?" Mark sighed, his cheerful facade crumbling.
You don't remember, do you? You're not here for a party. You're here because you chose to be.
"What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking.
This isn't the first time you've faced this choice,
Mark said, his tone low and grave.
You came here to stop something, to save someone. But every time, you've failed, and every failure resets the loop.
I stared at him, my mind racing. Who am I supposed to save? Mark's eyes darkened.
Yourself.
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The fragmented memories, the haunting laughter, the shadowy figure in the corner. It was all me. My fear, my guilt, my refusal to confront the truth. I was both the victim and the villain, trapped in a loop of my own making. The clock chimed, and the room began to collapse around us. Shadows oozed from the walls, swallowing the frozen guests one by one. The hum grew louder, deafening.
You have one last chance to break free,
Mark said, his voice barely audible over the chaos.
Face the truth, or the loop will consume you.
As the shadows closed in, I felt the weight of countless failed attempts bearing down on me. But this time, I wouldn't run. I wouldn't look away. I turned to the clock and reached for it, my hand trembling. The moment I touched the clock, everything went still. The house, the shadows, even the sound. It all vanished. I found myself standing in a void, a single figure waiting before me. It was me, the other me, the terrified version I had seen in the corner of the room. "You can end this," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But you have to accept it, all of it." Memories I had buried came rushing back. Choices I had made, mistakes I refused to admit. Pain, guilt, and loss surged through me. But with it came understanding. I wasn't here to escape. I was here to confront. "I'm ready," I whispered. The void shattered, and I woke up in my bed. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and the clock read 7 a.m., Sunday. For the first time, the day had changed. The loop was broken. As I sat there, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The nightmare was over, but the scars it left were real. And though I didn't know what lay ahead, I finally felt free to move forward. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. Please hit follow to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. See you soon, and goodbye.